Stick around to the end of this video for a neat little LP announcement. Okay, bye.
What if I'd gone to the movies?
This video contains full spoilers for Dr. Sleep and The Shining. So, I recently watched Dr. Sleep, the 2019 sequel to the 1980 film The Shining, as well as the adaptation of the 2013 Stephen King novel, and I was blown away. I can't comprehend the absolute gall and confidence it takes to set out to craft a follow-up to the cultural juggernaut that is The Shining film. This is a movie that is not only considered one of the finest horror films ever made, but it's one of the most iconic, quoted, and recognizable movies of all time. Full stop. It is a masterpiece that has withstood the test of time through masterful direction, chilling performances, genuine horror, and some of the most iconic imagery film has to offer. And then for the sequel to be as great as Dr. Sleep is just beyond me. Director, writer, and editor, respect, Mike Flanagan really did the impossible with this film. Flanagan is also known for the absolutely sublime Haunting of Hill House series on Netflix. Watch it, it's perfect. He crafts his own unique tone with Dr. Sleep's story, yet makes it feel like a natural progression and continuation of the world Kubrick built. Side note, I haven't read either of King's novels that these two films are based on, so I'll mostly be focusing on the stories that the movies tell. This is not to say that the books are any less important than the movies, although I guess that by saying I've seen the movies but not read the books, is that what I'm saying? No, of course not. We wouldn't have these two great films without the work and mind of Stephen King, but you already know that. This is too long for a side note. I'm pretty sure it's just a note now, so let's get back to it. The film language that Flanagan employs does not stick strictly to what Kubrick could have made, but it never for a second feels out of place. Take, for instance, the scene where Rose the Hat is kicked out of Abra's mind, flung from her room, and across the country back to her body. This is something that Kubrick at the time could not have created, at least not anywhere close to the level that Flanagan was able to achieve with modern-day technology. And yet, it doesn't feel out of place within the world of The Shining. Even through the wild visuals, there's a real analog sense to it. Nothing is too fancy or showy. There's a simplicity to its extravagance. Also, this one sequence was so trippy and astounding and cool that I did have to pause the movie for a second afterwards just to catch my breath. I'm dead serious. You can ask my girlfriend Sydney. Well, I mean, you can't ask her, but you can take my word for it, I guess. I could talk for hours about so many different aspects of Dr. Sleep. How Ewan McGregor was the perfect cast for an adult Danny and turned in an excellent performance. How the film creates a group of antagonists that are equal parts terrifying, sympathetic, entertaining, and brutal. The wonderful passing of the torch to Kylie Curran's Abra Stone. Or the fact that instead of digitally inserting deceased or aged actors from The Shining, Dr. Sleep simply recasts the roles. Like, seriously, this was such a simple yet smart decision. And they pick great actors to carry these parts. Actors that are not physically identical to the originator of the role, but who always feel like the same character. As Flanagan puts it,
it's about a continuity of character, not a continuity of actor.
They carry the spirit of the character and get the added benefit of avoiding any Rogue One digital distractions or ethical dilemmas. I could talk about all of those things, but today I want to talk about Dr. Sleep and its relationship with fan service. Now, what do I mean by fan service? Put most simply, it is an element added to a piece of media in order to please the audience. The idea is heavily tied to the feeling of nostalgia, as the majority of modern-day fan service is showing an audience something that it's familiar with, and usually has fond memories of. Now, heading into the sequel of one of the most famous movies of all time, which features iconic, genre-defining imagery and characters, it's safe to assume you'd be getting a good deal of fan service. And you wouldn't be wrong. It's not that Dr. Sleep employs fan service sparingly, but that it does so strategically. After a brief prologue introducing the True Knot, we start the movie not long after the conclusion of The Shining. Wendy and Dan have left Colorado after their traumatic stay at the Overlook, and the audience gets to see the immediate fallout from the events of the first film. This section of the movie also supplies the audience with some familiar imagery to ease them into this new story. In those first 12 minutes, we get an establishing shot of the overlook, the title card over the iconic carpet, a recreation of the iconic Steadicam shot of Danny on his one wheel, a peek into room 237, and even an appearance from Mrs. Massey herself. After that, we jump forward 31 years to 2011 and are met with a Dan Torrance at rock bottom. From this point on, Flanagan takes a departure from the overtly familiar. He focuses his story on Dan's three greatest struggles: his childhood trauma, alcohol, and his relationship with his deceased father. Dan takes Abra Stone under his wing and teaches her about The Shining as Dick Halloran once did for him. Together, Dan and Abra, with the help of Billy, the purest human to ever walk this earth, God rest his soul, keep the True Knot away from Abra and her power. Throughout the course of the story, there's not an overabundance of intertextuality, of that fan service notion. Moments from the first film are only ever sometimes seen in brief flashbacks. Most of them are only referred to in dialogue.
Said, "Great party, isn't it?" Shit, he didn't grin on his face till I pulled out a box for him. That grin went fast.
The iconic red rum in Dan's room is enough to tide the audience over for its runtime, as the story explores new facets of the ideas introduced in The Shining and new dimensions to our characters, both old and new. This all changes, however, when we reach our third act. At about 2 hours into the runtime, our heroes have been able to pick off all the bad guys except for Rose the Hat herself. Dan decides there is only one place they'll be able to face her. You guessed it, the Overlook Hotel. Dan goes to wake up the hotel, walking through its halls for the first time in nearly 40 years. The audience is met with an assault of familiar imagery and fan service. Seeing the Overlook again, so many of the old rooms and locations within, the actual red rum door, the bathroom, the apartment. Dan travels to the Gold Room and takes a seat at the bar. He's met with Lloyd the bartender, who's really an excellently recast Jack Torrance, his father, who is now, as the ending to The Shining would suggest, a permanent fixture of the hotel with no recollection of his previous life. And all that is before Rose shows up. Once she arrives at the hotel, we're met with the iconic blood elevator shot, Dan fighting off Rose with the axe, and several shots mirroring the first film. This is all leading to the climax where, to defeat Rose, Dan unlocks every ghost from the Overlook that he locked up long ago. Every iconic— take a shot every time I say the word iconic in this video— horror from The Shining is unleashed upon her, as the audience gets to revel in seeing the return of fan favorites such as the Grady twins and Great Party, isn't it, guy? I don't know his name. I think now would be a good time to pause Dr. Sleep for a moment and ask the question: when is fan service a bad thing? Because the phrase more often than not carries a fairly negative connotation. When the term fan service is used, it's sometimes to condemn a movie for inserting nostalgic elements to the detriment of the story being told, or most commonly, placing those elements in a story strictly for the audience, while these elements hold no thematic or character-led resonance within the film itself. This is what I would personally call bad fan service. An excellent example is another 2019 film, Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Oh, also, spoilers for Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker features a sequence not too incredibly dissimilar from Dr. Sleep's. At the end of the movie, Rey travels to Tatooine, an immediately recognizable location. She then spends a few moments wandering through the locale and recreating a few recognizable shots from her respective franchise. And we end the movie, after the nail on the coffin of one of the poorest character choices I've ever seen, but that's a video for another day, on this, the Twin Suns shot. Maybe the single most iconic shot in all of Star Wars. But here is the key difference between Rise of Skywalker and Dr. Sleep. This doesn't mean anything to Rey. She's never been on Tatooine. She's never seen these shots and moments she's recreating. When she stares at the Twin Suns, I'm clued in as an audience member to the significance of the sight, but Rey, the character, has no idea. This is J.J. Abrams reaching through the screen and saying, "Hey, you remember this thing you like? Here it is. Again, you get it again." And this may be enough for some people to walk away from the film satisfied, but as the culmination of Rey's story and the final scene in her trilogy of films, it rings incredibly hollow to have her stand alone in a place she's never known for the sake of the audience's nostalgia. Now, back to Dr. Sleep. Dr. Sleep's finale has a lot in common with The Rise of Skywalker on the surface, but at a closer look, it is fundamentally different. Because every bit of the third act of the film is deeply rooted in character and thematic resonance. For the entire movie, we follow Dan as he's done everything in his power to escape the Overlook Hotel and the trauma that he associates with it. Through alcohol and drugs, through building a new life for himself, everything he's done has been to distance himself from this place. So, in finally embracing his shine and mentoring Abra, this was the only place the film could have ended. Mike Flanagan knows what the audience and fans of The Shining wanted to see. He knew that a Shining sequel that didn't contain these elements would likely leave a large portion of the audience dissatisfied. So he did something so smart and so interesting. Rather than just throwing these things into the movie with little to no motivation, he weaves this ending destination into the fabric of the whole movie and connects it to Dan's journey. As Flanagan puts it,
But underneath it all, it's a catharsis that isn't about indulging these dark ideas. It's about confronting them.
this sequence is Dan confronting every last one of his fears in order to help save Abra. As Dan walks around waking up the hotel, I was filled with joy at seeing these landmarks of cinematic history again. However, that joy soon dissipated as I focused back on Dan and the visible anxiety and suffering that stepping foot back into this building was causing him. I was given exactly what I wanted to see as a fan of The Shining, but not how I was expecting at all. Which brings us to the Gold Room scene, maybe my favorite scene in the film. This scene had maybe the biggest chance of being empty fan service of them all. I mean, think about it. It takes place in a classic location, it's recreating a well-known scene from the first film, and it brings back the single most iconic Shining character, through a great piece of casting that I touched on earlier. And yet it's anything but hollow. Flanagan uses this scene as the thematic climax of Dan's character arc by tying it into his three greatest struggles: his childhood trauma, alcohol, and his relationship with his father. Finally having the chance to talk with his father, Dan tells him about his and his mother's life after the Overlook, how they moved to Florida so they wouldn't see snow again, how Dan used his shine one last time so that Wendy wouldn't see Jack when looking at him, and eventually how Wendy passed away after weeks of Dan seeing death flies all over her. However, Jack's mind is no longer his, as he refers to himself only as
Just Lloyd the bartender, pouring joy at the Overlook Hotel.
I'll pour whatever you like, Mr. Torrance.
providing a parallel to events 30 years prior. Jack insists that Dan has him mistaken for someone else and offers him a drink. Dan hesitates, stating that he's been sober for 8 years and that this sip would ruin all of it. It's at this point that Jack's mind seemingly starts to slip through the facade. He begins by recounting all of life's troubles to Dan.
Depression, stress, remorse, failure, wipes it all away.
He tells Dan to his face that him and his mother were nothing but mouths to feed, and claims that they wasted his life. Echoing what Dan already knew to be true, Jack praises alcohol as the fix for his perceived burden, a bona fide cure-all. Medicine.
He's Lloyd, the barman, but he's also my dad. And that was very moving. It was a nice scene to play. It surprised me as we played it. I didn't expect it to sort of take us where it did.
On the house.
Thanks, Dad.
And I felt very much like that little boy from The Shining. It's like the worst thing he could imagine is what he hears his dad saying to him.
After having these appalling things spoken to him by the person in life most meant to protect him, Dan is confronted by the very source of his trauma. By just the look in his eyes, you can tell that he's taken right back to being the little boy running through the hotel in fear of being caught by his father, which is why the next moment is the most important one in the film for Dan. Jack insists on Danny taking his medicine. Dan's struggle with alcoholism has always had intimate ties to his father. He talks earlier in the film on it.
Thinking about my dad. He also stood in a room like this once, wanting to get well.
Confessing that he would drink because, in some twisted way, the alcohol would allow him to share a connection with his father, something he craved more than anything. And here is his father now, with him physically offering him a drink. But Dan doesn't take it. This acts as the crux of Dan's arc because he's presented with everything that's been holding him back. His childhood trauma, his relationship with his father, and alcohol. And through being a strong and morally good person, he's able to finally overcome every single one of them. all in one scene. The scene also acts as a mirror to that of The Shining, when Jack sat at Dan's seat. However, the key difference is that while Dan stood his ground and refused to drink, Jack famously says that he'd sell his soul for a glass of beer. This shows how Dan has grown past his father and become a good person. This is also why the Overlook is unable to fully control Dan a bit later on, but I'll come back to that. Dan's confrontation with his father is cut short by Abra informing him that Rose has arrived at the Overlook. Dan and Abra then mount their defense. They trap Rose in Dan's mind in an attempt to box Rose up along with the ghosts of the Overlook. Dan's mind throughout the film is shown to be the Overlook's hedge maze, providing an excellent backdrop for this showdown. Also, familiar imagery mixed with new context? Something of a theme in the film. Once Rose catches on to their plan and the jig is sufficiently up, Dan turns to his last defense, letting go of the ghosts he's spent his entire life containing. Through Dan opening the box, the audience is treated to the return of so many fan-favorite characters. Mrs. Massey that we've seen, the Grady twins are back, Delbert Grady, pretty much every ghost from the original film that you can think of. But remember, it's not about indulgence, but confrontation. By coming back to the Overlook and releasing these demons he's held for 38 plus years, Dan is weaponizing his past trauma. He's taking the things that caused him the most pain and using them to help and protect Abra. Although, as he'll soon come to find, this does not come without a cost. After the ghosts make quick work of Rose, who do they turn to but Dan himself? He is quickly overtaken by the hotel and turned into a twisted mirror of his father in his final state. Dan's worst fear. And this part is so interesting to me. It took a while for me to think on it and really decipher its meaning, but here's what I got. This is the final test of Dan's character, and evidence that he has become a better person than his father ever was. Because think about it. In The Shining, it does not take too much convincing for Jack to turn on his family. It takes a naked woman, some ghost beer, some strange conversations with butlers, and the next thing you know, he's grabbing an axe and hunting them down himself. Jack was a man of weak conviction. The hotel knew that, and it shows. On the inverse, Dan is forcibly overtaken by the ghosts themselves. He is taken deeper into the hotel than Jack ever went, deeper than Jack ever had to go, and yet he still finds it within himself to break out of its trance enough to free Abra and finish their plan. Because Dan fights against the hotel while Jack welcomes it with open arms. And that is the fundamental difference between father and son. But Dan does find his way to the boiler room and enacts his plan of burning the Overlook to the ground. All his life, he's been haunted by the fact that he struggled to even look his mother in the eyes in her final moments. Now, during his own, as the Overlook begins to burn to the ground, he shares a moment with her, finally able to find peace in her gaze. It's a beautifully crafted moment and send-off for Dan, though technically not his last. He's shown talking to Abra afterwards, mentoring her as Dick once did for him, and assuring both Abra and the audience that the shine will go on. Dr. Sleep is such a great film, I love it. The follow-up to one of the greatest horror films ever made. It tells a story I didn't know I needed, but now couldn't do without. One of the biggest reasons it succeeds at the level that it does is how Mike Flanagan chooses to use elements from The Shining. He uses them not as a stand-in for story, but to support the already fantastic original new story he presents. He never lets a moment be just something we recognize. He consistently provides new, exciting context for familiar faces and locales to return in, always keeping the audience happy, intrigued, and on their toes. Because, at the end of the day, it's not about indulgence, it's about confrontation. Hey, thank you so much for watching that video, I really appreciate it. If you liked it, drop a like, share it with a friend you take to the Overlook Hotel with you, and subscribe to see more videos like it. Now, for the big LP announcement as promised, can I get a drum roll, please? I'm alone in my room. I don't know when that would happen. But as of today, we are officially launching the LockerPunch Patreon. Now, we realize we still have a small following at the moment, made up of 1.15 thousand of the greatest people on this planet. So we're realistically not expecting an overabundance of patrons at this point in time. This is just an added option for anyone who has $1 a month to spare and wants to help out a little bit. Because, to quote the great Lady Gaga,
You know, there could be 100 people in the room and 99 don't believe, but all it takes is one.
and as Lady Gaga once said,
You know, 100 people can be in a room and 99 don't believe in you, and just one person believes in you, and it can change everything.
to reiterate the words of one Lady Gaga,
100 people and there can be in a one room, right? And 99 don't believe in you, but just one believes, and it can change your whole life.
and finally, because she said this quite often,
100 people in the room you can have, and 99 don't believe in you, and just one does, and it changes your whole life.
the link to our Patreon can be found in the notes below or on our channel. If you've got a minute, maybe check it out. Take a look around, tour the place. We're offering a few neat little things for very little, such as early access to videos and your name on every video essay and short film we make. It would be happening right now, probably. But that is all for today. If you're still listening to me now, thanks for making it. I'm proud of you. And as we continue into October and spooky season, you can expect many more spooky things coming from your friends at LockerPunch. Until next time, watch The Haunting of Hill House. God bless Halloween, and God bless Mike Flanagan.